When it comes to gaming, I've often said that the dice have a funny way of working out. Such as, every now and then, when you really, really need a crit, we actually get it. And also in situations where, like, the NPC villain is attacking your character, the guy who could one-shot your character and kill him instantly attacks and winds up rolling a fumble. So, regardless of what kind of gamer you are, whether you're a war gamer, a board gamer, even a card gamer now, as I understand that there's actually a card gamer too out there that has a dice component to it, and especially role players, we've all had to rely on dice at one point or another, and we've all fallen prey to the whims of fortune, luck, fate, or even, as some of us like to call them, the dice gods. But whatever you want to call it, the dice do have a funny way of working out, in my experience. And this applies to many different areas, but I'm mostly talking about RPGs, of course. But at the same time, there are ways to overdo it when it comes to the dice. In and of itself, incorporating a dice mechanic into most game systems to provide a component of randomness isn't necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. But a lot of times, you still have gamers who still seem to utterly despise having to use dice, and it comes and a lot of times it actually comes in the form of an argument that sounds a lot like, my character could do this in their sleep while being hogtied and balancing on their nose, so why should I have to make a roll for it? That may be an extreme, if not ridiculous, example, but trust me, I've heard it often enough. So in a lot of ways, one area where the dice may be necessary is determining a character's ability to perform a certain task or perform a given action. And I think it's a good mechanic to have in any game, regardless of what kind of game it is, realistically. When you've got beginning to low level characters, the dice kind of sum up the character's ability at that point, which is pretty much hit or miss. As the character advances and progresses, they get better, and oftentimes, even with a bad roll on the dice, they can still succeed at what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Examples of this actually could be the D20 system. You've got bonuses to different types of rolls. Actually, bonuses to just about every kind of roll that you would make. And the bonuses get better and better as the character progresses, as the character goes up in level. Other games are based on the use of a dice pool, much like Earth Dawn and the White Wolf system, or even games where the dice you roll actually increase. You go from rolling D4s to D6s to D8s, stuff like that. Which again are your games a lot like the Cortex system, and actually again Earth Dawn, oddly enough, and they enable you to roll higher and higher results on the dice eventually, and achieve higher successes, achieve higher difficulty numbers, target numbers, whatever. So all in all, this usually works pretty well for a few different reasons. But the most important reason, if not the only reason really worth mentioning, of course, is for the chance of failure. Now, if characters, and by extension in some ways players, were allowed or able to accomplish absolutely everything that they set out to do successfully without even the slightest hassle, then the game wouldn't be very fun after a while. And anybody who actually would be having fun in a game or in a situation like that is probably not somebody you're going to want to have at the table anyway. I find that characters, much like real people, actually have the potential to learn as much from their mistakes and their failures as they do from their success, from their achievements. And it's all in the way that the GM presents this situation, presents the information to them. When a character fails primarily due to the result of the dice, or to the result of a dice roll, then perhaps the GM should attempt to explain it as some kind of minor mistake, or perhaps even something of an oversight on the part of the character, on the part of the character, so that everyone, character, player, GM, everyone, can mark it as a learning experience for the character and just another milestone in the character's journey, and then show as an example of how the character is still learning, is still growing, or that they still have a lot to learn, no matter what it is that they set out to do, and no matter what it is they're trying to do. back to dice pool systems. Actually, for just a moment, there is a lot to be said for these types of games. A friend of mine actually pointed out once upon a time what your actual chance of success is in dice pool systems, citing that the more dice you roll, your ability to roll higher numbers, gain gads of successes depending on the system that we're talking about here, or hit certain target numbers, actually goes down. Now, at the time, he did a very, very good job of explaining the overall chances rolling really high or really well when you're dealing with a large dice pool. And in a lot of ways, I think he was right. Take a D10s, for example. Now, say if you're trying to roll high on a D10, and of course, by high, I mean you want to roll an 8, 9, or a 10. Any one of those three would be helpful. You really only have about a 30% chance of hitting one of those numbers altogether. If you want to hit 8, 9, or 10, the last three numbers on the D10, so altogether you have a 30% chance of getting those. Any one of those. Now, if you want to roll an 8 or better on multiple dice, then what winds up happening is your chances of getting high numbers on each dice actually do go down the more dice you add, the more dice you're rolling. I'll let you use your imaginations, and actually you can grab a couple of D10s and you do the math. Now, his point was that as you progress in the game, you should get better. Your character should get better at what they're trying to do, what they normally do, whatever it is they do, depending on the nature of the game itself. But a lot of times, the way character advancement is demonstrated is by, in most systems, in a lot of systems, I should say, is by allowing you to roll more dice for particular actions whenever your character tries to do something. But at the same time, actually limits your chances for rolling particularly well. Me personally, I actually think that it's a solid mechanic to have in a game system, because yes, while your character progresses, they should get better at whatever it is they do, whatever it is they specialize in. But the fact that the player's chances for rolling extremely high actually go down the more dice that they have to roll, I just think that it makes everything more challenging. Out of character, if not in character. Which again, at higher levels, as characters advance to a certain point, we all know it can get a little difficult to actually challenge the characters, and then sometimes, in some cases as well, it can get a little difficult to challenge the players as well. And so having a mechanic like that, having a rule set like that in a game, I think is actually a good thing. Is a good thing to have. If that's the only, and a lot of times if that's the only thing holding the characters back from succeeding at everything they do, whether or not they roll good or bad on the dice. And again, we're talking about advanced characters, so more often than not, perhaps they should be rolling well, and they should be succeeding at most rolls they make. Then I think the occasional slip up, the occasional failure on the dice would actually be a good thing to help still kind of keep things in check, keep things in balance. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you also have a few games out there, of course, that don't use dice at all. There's no dice component in the rules anywhere, actually, and this applies, in my experience, I should say, this applies to some more of your LARP type games, as well as a very, very few tabletop games. But even in LARPs, a lot of LARPs anyway, you still use like random tokens or paper, rock, scissors in order to resolve tests, and which again still kind of calls for sort of a random component. But even in LARPs and whatnot, with paper, rock, scissors, with the chances of tying on a particular throw, then those game systems also have a way of resolving ties. Like, ties go to whoever has the most points or traits in a particular category, however it works, whatever you want to call it. One particular game in this area that I would like to mention, however, is Amber. I'm not sure how many people out there have actually played Amber, but for those of you who haven't, A good friend of mine actually turned me on to it in recent years, and she's one of my regular players in one of my regular groups, as well as one of my own personal, or I call it my personal, as one of my regular GMs who runs me in one of the groups that I'm involved in and everything. And the game itself was just amazing. Now, Amber is an amazing RPG based on a series of novels written by Roger Zelazny, which has a great system, an incredibly rich setting, an incredibly rich world full of characters and whatnot, intrigue, and all kinds of fun stuff. Everything that makes an RPG fun. And also uses absolutely no dice, so it's almost an entirely pure role-playing experience. It's entirely pure role-playing type game. And it requires a lot of work on the part of the GM in order to get things ready, in order to be able to move things along. The way the system is set up as well, it leaves the GM being the sole arbiter of absolutely everything that happens in the game. It's easy in certain situations where all the GM has to do is compare your character stats to those of another character, if you're like getting involved in a contest of some sort, or if you're fighting somebody, something like that. But it also gives the GM sole responsibility of being the one to decide whether or not your stats or your character's ability is high enough or is good enough to perform a certain task here and there, such as walking the pattern, as it were, in that game, which is actually a big part of the game for certain characters and everything. Especially if you're a member of like the Amber family. Which again is probably something that you'd have to experience the game, play the game in order to fully understand. But still, in that instance, in that setting, in that game, the GM is the only person. I mean, no dice, no dice, no random component, nothing. It's pure numbers and arbitration on the part of the GM. The GM is the only person who decides whether or not your character succeeds at what it is that they are attempting to do. But even so, it's a really, really good game if your GM knows the rules, knows the game world, the characters, or multiple worlds, as the case may be in Amber. It's got all the background information on the history of the world, the history of the game setting of the Amber world itself, and everything. And otherwise, all in all, it's a really, really awesome game when it's done right. So, there it is. Any way you slice it, utilizing dice is still probably going to be the best way to resolve things in-game when necessary. If you agree or disagree, please feel free to comment, message me, post, email, can contact me through the usual methods and whatnot. Oh yeah, and also on a somewhat completely unrelated note, apparently I got a summons for jury duty, so how about that? Yeah, so there it is. So anyway, thanks again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Gabriel Stryffe coming at you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Equitas Veritas Bellatus.